Hey, freshmen. We are on our second to last class. We are going to be shifting into our final project. The first thing I want you to answer, how do you feel about starting new classes in a few weeks? Do you know what your classes are? Do you have no idea? Those things. How do you feel? All right, so we talked a lot about race and police and white supremacy in America, but what now? What can we, the people, do about systemic racism in the US? So we did our welcome question. We're going to review. I have a little lecture, and then I'm going to introduce your final. These are the questions that are going to be the focus of your final. We're thinking about what can we do about systemic racism within the police force, right? Systemic racism impacts a lot of institutions in America, like school, government, all that stuff, but we're going to focus on police. So we're thinking about, do you think we should keep the police as they are? Do we defund them and fund other services? Do we just take away their weapons? Do we completely abolish the police? And maybe what about prisons? Do we get rid of those? You have no spelling test this week, but remember to get these things done in the next 2 weeks. I will accept late work until I can't accept late work no more. Okay, so now you're going to answer all three of these questions in complete thoughts. One, what is a topic we discussed this quarter? What do you remember learning? What are some of your thoughts about what we've learned? And lastly, what message would you take from this class to share with others? All right, so some things we covered were America's values and white supremacy. We looked at the This Is America music video. We watched that video of the Sikh man talking about being a non-Black person of color and what we can do. We talked about dominant and counter narrative with the Black Lives Matter, police, how the media portrays victims and criminals. And we watched a great documentary about a white supremacist group. So now, right, we learned all that stuff on the left, and it can make you really angry and sad, and it might make you feel hopeless, right? We live in this world that lets this stuff happen, right? That makes me upset. But we have to hold on to some level of hope that the power of people and organizing and standing up for what we want, we can create a future that is good for everybody, right? With hard work, it's possible. This stuff makes me angry, and it's okay to be angry. Angry is a valid emotion, right? But it's what you do with that anger that is either okay or not okay, right? If I'm angry at someone and I turn that anger into fighting them, right? That's not that doesn't justify my anger, or my anger doesn't justify fighting that person. Just like when we hear all the horrible stuff that happens to people of color in this country, it makes me angry, but I cannot make it or let it make me angry enough that I become a victim, right? In that movie we watched last week, those white people were so angry at people that were different than them. And they're so angry at the world that made them poor or not as strong or all these things, right? And they let that anger turn them into a victim, right? And now that they're a victim, they're out there and what they're doing is hurting other people, right? Just like, let's say you're born in East Oakland and it's hard out there, right? And it's not fair, and it makes me angry that it's like that, right? But if I let that anger just sit and I don't do anything with it, then I become a victim, right? That's how we have gang violence. That's how we have fights in the streets, shootings, right? We just had some Fremont kids be murdered, right? Because people get so angry that they let themselves become the victim, right? And that's what I do not want you guys to do. We can be angry, but we want to use that anger to change our future, right? To put it into positive things. So we, as ninth graders, we don't have a lot of access to make change. But what we can do is we can start imagining the future that we want and the type of community we want to create. So I want you to now answer, how do you imagine your future and what type of community do you want to create? Do you want one that has no guns? Do you want no violence? Do you want neighbors to know each other's names? Do you want to be able to hang out outside after dark, right? Do you want police to stop killing Black people? Do you want police to not exist anymore? Do you want prisons to not exist anymore? What do you imagine the future of America should look like for its citizens, especially its people of color? Okay, so it can be really difficult to imagine our world without the police force, right? They are responsible for a lot of things in our society. We're going to watch 4 videos about what it means to abolish or defund the police departments. This first one is just an intro, and then the last 3 are going to talk about specific scenarios that cops are generally called and what that would look like if we didn't have police. These are the questions you're going to be answering. So I want you to read them right now and be thinking about them while you watch. So what sparked the question of defunding police? Do you think that one city should need $190 million for one police force? Do you think that's too much? Do you think that's not enough? Do you think that's just right? And what do you think the world without police would look like?
If you went to one of the many protests throughout the country in reaction to the murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police, you'd likely hear this. Calls for defunding and abolishing the police become increasingly popular amongst protesters. And now President Trump and his Republican allies have made defunding the police a political weapon.
They want to get rid of the police forces. They actually want to get rid of it.
Even while prominent Democrats have rejected the term. So while some are demanding radical change, what that change actually looks like is an open question. Listen to those calling to defund the police, and you'll hear calls for shifting resources from police to other services, like social workers.
There's schools that have cops and no social workers, or cops and no mental health providers, or police and not enough teachers.
You'll hear that defunding police is different than merely reforming police with incremental changes.
If we're really serious about safety, we need to reimagine the whole model.
Some take the slogan more literally than others.
Right now, the budget for Minneapolis Police Department is around $190 million with around 900 officers. Let's say 5 years from now. What would you want those numbers to be at?
Gone. It really is that direct and simple.
Others say there will still be a need for enforcement, even if they aren't called police.
Police are violence workers, and there are situations where we may need violence workers, but we can't put all our eggs in this basket of thinking the police are the only possible solution to this problem.
Will they carry guns? What happens when the worst case happens? How do you stop the problems of the past replicating themselves in a new system?
This is not a conversation just about changing out a system, because we could change out a system all day. But if that system still replicates harm and violence, the ugliness of racism, then we're not going to actually change the conditions for people.
To find answers, we talked with 3 prominent figures calling for a world without police as we know it. We proposed 3 scenarios: a traffic stop, a domestic disturbance call, and a school shooting. And we asked, what would they look like in a world without police?
Okay, so now you're going to take the time to answer these 3 questions before we go to the traffic stop video. Okay, so this video is going to show us how can we imagine a world without police conducting a traffic stop. And the things we're going to be thinking about or listening for are what would it look like for someone to get pulled over without the police. The black man in this video is going to explain what it could possibly be if we don't have police, but we still pull people over. They're also going to tell us about, so what do police normally use traffic stops for now? Is it just to tell someone to stop speeding or their taillights out? And then what should the real purpose of a traffic stop be? Lastly, your own opinion. Do you think there should be consequences for traffic violations? And if so, what kind of consequences do you think there should be? Should it be a ticket? Should it be getting arrested? Or should it be something less than that?
Let me tell you a little bit about Michelle Obama. She broke barriers. I didn't know I could be the first lady. She made history.
She was more popular than the president.
The new CNN original series, First Ladies, Michelle Obama.
Premieres Sunday at 10 on CNN.
Let's use this as an example. Let's say someone was speeding and gets pulled over. What's an alternative way for a society to handle that situation?
What would it look like if somebody actually was concerned with the way that I was driving to pull me over, or but it wasn't a cop, it wasn't a police officer? What would it look like if they, if it was somebody who managed safety on the roads and came and said, hey, I noticed that you might have been driving in a way, or I noticed your taillight was out. I just wanted to share that with you and share maybe some statistics around, when people speed, how that increases the likelihood of someone potentially dying, or you harming yourself and somebody else. And, let's have a discussion that's focused on education and trying to get you to drive better, as opposed to, pulling you over the fear of being punished. And, eventually, because of the laws that have allowed pretextual and investigatory stops, that police use these stops as fishing expeditions, and that they ask you questions to try to see if you're committing some kind of crime when you could have been stopped for a traffic violation. And so the model is, it's why, if the focus is on getting someone to drive better, why is it that someone with a gun is pulling them over and then asking them questions to look for crime?
So if you have some enforcement, though, whether it's police or police by another name, if you still have racism in society, black men are still going to get pulled over more than white people. It just might not be by police. How do you stop that?
Again, it's unearthing the entire system and then creating mechanisms of accountability and imbuing in the design an approach that does not center punishment and the kinds of discriminatory practices that we see, and that built into a design is a level of accountability that avoids that from happening altogether. But a part of this is also, it's a part of it's in many ways it's a cultural shift, because the relationship between criminality and race is so tight that it becomes difficult. Like, for example, in the case of when I got pulled over, the police officer for in his mind, he was operating under the law, and this is the way in which laws, and if you're operating within a way that seems justified, that it can hide racial discriminatory practices. But the focus is then on some sort of interpretation of the law as opposed to developing mechanisms of accountability and preventing those instances from happening.
Let's use the example of a DUI, where someone's pulled over and they're a danger to the community. If they were still driving, they could hurt themselves, they could hurt someone else. How does a non-police model prevent someone from getting behind the wheel who is putting the community at harm?
There might be times where somebody is continuously harmful to a community. And there might be contexts where, when after transformative processes and attempts to hold a person accountable, there is no cease of the activity that's harming people. There can be a model in which, someone can, there can still be a place for people who engage in this way that, the focus is on still the capacity for them to transform. It's not focused on punishment, but it's focused on still giving people the opportunity to live with dignity and decency because they're human beings, and that giving them the opportunity and context to be able to transform themselves through a process of accountability that's not focused on punishment and vengeance, but that's focused on attempting to transform yourself through a process and accountability. And that model, again, that kind of model does not look like prisons.
Okay, so what this person was saying is, so instead of having a policeman on the road, we have a traffic monitor who would pull someone over, not with the goal of giving them a ticket or some sort of punishment, instead educating them of like, hey, this is the reason you actually shouldn't drive this way, or you have a tail light out, did you know that? And this can cause harm, all this stuff, right? So educating. But then the question was asked, like, let's say someone is a drunk driver and this is like the third time that they've gone behind the wheel and they've driven drunk, right? In our society today, the law puts those people in jail. What this person is saying is instead we have places or programs that these people can participate in that helps them reform or transform the way that they are living, right? There's resources that help attack other problems that might be causing this person to drunk drive, right? And letting them know why this is so dangerous, right? It's about education and recognizing someone as a human more than punishing them for breaking a law. All right, so now answer these 3 questions. All right, so our second scenario is, well, what about school shootings, right? What if we have no police? And we can think of mass shootings as well, right? We can think of any time a white man has gone and killed a bunch of people at one time. The questions you're thinking about, so historically, have police helped stop or have they prevented mass shootings? What is an early warning system? And why might people not want to raise a red flag about someone who they think could shoot other people? And what does this video say about violence responders? And do we need those if we abolish police? Do we still need people who respond to violent situations?
John Lewis wasn't doing what he did, I would not be here today.
We came here to do our job. We came here to work.
His voice and his example are needed now as much as they've ever been.
John Lewis, Good Trouble, Saturday at 10.
Let's talk about a third situation, which is some horrible violent event in progress. Let's say a school shooting. And this is something we've all seen the video of the SWAT teams coming into a school. How could we reimagine that?
So with school shootings, we've imagined that if we just fill the schools with people with guns, that this is going to solve the problem. But of course, there were armed police at Columbine back in the 90s. There were armed police at Parkland in Florida, and it did not help the situation. And when we introduce guns into any environment, we make the likelihood of accidental shootings, suicides, and interpersonal violence increase. What we need instead is a kind of early warning system. In almost all of these school shooting cases, there were people who had a pretty good idea that this person was going to cause violence and harm to someone. They maybe didn't know for sure when, they maybe weren't convinced, but in part because this whole thing has been turned over to the police to manage, there's been a reluctance on the part of young people to raise the red flag about someone because they don't want to be the kid who gets their friend arrested. What we need is a kind of early alert system that's staffed by counselors and social workers in the schools so that students know that they have someone to go to bring these concerns to without necessarily having it immediately result in criminalization.
Of course, that begs the question, though, is what happens if, right? We can do all these things to prevent it, and we can try to take guns away, but we know there's already so many guns out in this country, and we know there's some people who just snap, who lose it. In that worst case scenario where all those preventative measures didn't work, is there still, in your vision, still some kind of residual police force that would come in?
It's possible, police are violence workers, and there are situations where we may need violence workers. But I'll just point out, we've seen situations where coaches just go up to someone with a gun and disarm them, that people use what's around them because they can't wait for the police to come. So we can't put all our eggs in this basket of thinking the police are the only possible solution to this problem.
Okay, now respond to these 3 questions. One more video. All right, so a lot of times police are called to domestic violence situations to de-escalate, but too often it ends in violence or someone being killed. Like in Minneapolis 6 years ago, maybe, Stefan Clark was having a domestic dispute with his girlfriend, and a neighbor got nervous, called the police, and he ended up dead after that altercation. And while you should never be arguing with your boyfriend or girlfriend so loudly that people are scared for your safety, it also doesn't mean you deserve to die or be arrested. So let's see what they have to say.
I'm David Culver in Wuhan, China. In Yokohama, Japan.
CNN in Abu Dhabi.
I'm Nermin Baghed in Sinjar, Iraq. Northern Syria. Lagos, Nigeria.
Stockholm.
Outside London.
CNN Sao Paulo, Brazil. In Mexico City.
This is CNN.
Let's say a neighbor overheard a domestic dispute down the hall and it sounded scary, potentially violent. What would happen? How could society handle that situation in a more just manner?
So there's a few ways to do this. One, and the hopes in the world that I would live, that the hope is that the world that I live in, our neighbors know each other and they are familiar with each other and each other's conditions. And so perhaps the person in the home has a safety plan that actually identifies the neighbor down the way to help support that person if they hear domestic harm and violence happening in the household. And so the neighbors would have a set of recommendations to move forward if something's happening. Okay, that's one way. Maybe that we're not there yet and that doesn't exist yet. So maybe there's a hotline that you call. You hear a domestic violence or harm issue happening. Hotline that you call. You hear a domestic violence or harm issue happening. You call hotline. That's folks who are trained in de-escalate. That when they show up, that the issue will be resolved. I think that's really important. Oftentimes, what happens, especially if you're in a Black community, is you call on the police on issues of domestic violence and harm, and they can do very little. How many times have we heard women say that they called the police several times? There was a restraining order, and they still were killed or they still were harmed. And so we have to actually remember that the things that we think the police do is not always what they actually do. The things that we think police prevent, they don't always actually prevent. And so we have the space in the room now to imagine new systems to put in place.
So would, in the scenario that you just sketched out, a counselor shows up, would they be armed?
No, I don't think that arming somebody actually helps in any situation. There are ways to de-escalate a situation, even if someone is armed. What we know is an eye for an eye. We know that, and what we've been taught is an eye for an eye. So you have to bring someone in with a gun. Force has to meet force in order to de-escalate. But we've seen the opposite. How often have we seen the police be called, whether that's someone calling for themselves because they're in a mental health crisis or there's a crisis happening, and the police show up and people die because of it? Just happened yesterday in Lancaster, California. There was died because of it. Just happened yesterday in Lancaster, California. There was a domestic harm issue. Police showed up. They say that the individual and the officers got into a dispute, and that situation could have been largely de-escalated, and that person could be still living today.
I want to ask you, because I know you can look at England, where cops don't have guns. But America, we have so many guns per capita. How can you have an unarmed, some kind of enforcement without guns in a country like America, where we have so many guns out there as it is?
It means that we have to have real gun control. It means that we have to lessen the guns, not just from police officers, but actual individual human beings as well.
Okay, I realized I forgot to show you the questions before. Sorry. So how can we respond to a concern of others without the police? What resources could help us? Who do people normally call, and what are the results? Do they help? In your ideal community, how would you want others to de-escalate a domestic violence situation? So in that video, they said, like, statistically, police do not help resolve domestic situations or mental health crises. They often make them worse, hurt people, and can kill people. She talked about having a close community, right, where we know our neighbors, is her ideal community. So I want you to be thinking about those things as you answer. Okay, so we know that the dominant narrative is the police are needed and called for what? I want you to just list as many things as you can. Doesn't have to be a complete sentence. Just write a long list of what you think the police has to do. Okay, so we know that they are needed for a lot of things, like their traffic stops, They respond to domestic situations, violent situations, mental health crises, some animal situations. They respond to problems that we have at school, which isn't cool at all. They have to solve crime, deal with drugs. They do other things that aren't great or helpful, like support ICE, a lot of other things. They have a lot to do, right? That's a big job, and they only get trained for less than a year. So less than a year, and these people are responsible for the safety in all aspects of all people. That's too much. So the counter narrative is that we have other people, professionals, and services that can handle certain situations with better training than the police receive themselves. But what does that mean for our police force? This is our main question of our final project. Knowing what the police are like, what their responsibilities are, what other resources are in our world, what does this mean for their future? So we know today, right now, they're seen as heroes with only a few bad apples. We're going to be thinking about what we've discussed and learned in this class, and you're going to decide, what do you think the future of the police force looks like? You'll be writing an essay, taking a position, and explaining your own beliefs with evidence to back up your claim. The evidence is going to come from everything we've learned. It's going to come from my slides. It's going to come from your answers in Pear Deck. You won't have to do any extra research. We're going to start this week and work through next week. It's a minimum of 1 page double-spaced. So that's about only 250 words. I think 500 words double-spaced is 2 pages. Size 12 font, Times New Roman. And these are the stances you can take. So do you think that the future of the police looks like keeping the police as they are? And why do you think that? Reduce the police funding and reduce their responsibilities. And what would that look like? And why do you think we should do that? Abolish the police completely. Tell us what that would look like. Demilitarize the police, which means taking away their lethal weapons. Like they mentioned in the UK, they don't have guns, right? Right now they have like tanks, machine guns, crazy tasers, pepper spray, these sound cannons, right? Do they need all that? Do you think if we took that away, it would solve a lot of problems? Or you can create your answer, your own answer about what the future of police should look like. So, assignments for this week, you have this Ed puzzle that you just finished. It says spelling test, but there's no spelling test, and you have the Pear Deck. So your exit ticket is, what do you think you're going to write about? Oh, but first, I need to show you. Okay. Oops, post. So you're going to go to the Pear Deck. And the first part's easy. It's writing your thesis, and you just follow the directions. I teach you what a thesis is, what the parts are, and you write your own. Then, once you get to this slide, this is where we gather evidence. So first, you're going to gather evidence from the lecture slides. I've put them all together in one document for you to look through. You're going to go to this link, zoop, and come back to the Pear Deck, go to the next page. Write your evidence and ideas that support your thesis. The more that you write here, the easier the next steps in the essay are going to be. So I open my the slides, and I'm going to look through and remind myself of the information and you can look at it like this. And let's say that I'm looking at these student answers and I really like this person answer and I'm going to like quote them. So I write down it's slide 13 on Canva. So Canva, slide 13, and then the quote, people of color use this system, blah, 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 blah. And I do that for all the other evidence I want to collect. You can submit them all in one big answer, or you can do a bunch of responses, up to you. Then you're going to gather evidence from the Pear Decks. So click the link, go back to the Pear Deck, go to your note-taking slide, and this time you're going to be clicking on these titles, and what it leads you to, is our previous Pear Decks, and if you completed them, you did a lot of writing and thinking about this topic that you can use in your essay. And you can also use resources from this Pear Deck as well, like the articles, the videos we watched, right? It shows my answer if I click through. So you can collect your evidence from these slides. You can use videos as evidence. You can use journals as evidence. You can use my journal. You can use your journal. You can use anything in these Pear Decks or the lecture notes to support your thesis. Now your exit ticket. What do you think you're going to write about? And that's it. As always, text me, email me if you have questions. Google comment is the worst way to get my attention. That's it. Bye. Love you.